today we will talk about the different limit theorems. Theorem 1 states that the limit of a function, if it exists, is unique. So we say that if we have the limit of f of x as x approaches a be equal to L sub 1, and the limit of f of x as x approaches a is equal to L sub 2, by the uniqueness of limits, then L1 is equal to L2. Okay? So, iisa lang dapat yung limit ng function kapag parehas lang sila. Theorem number 2 states that the limit of a constant as x approaches a is equal to the constant itself. So whatever man na value ng a nyo dito, basta constant yung hinahanap ninyo na limit, the answer will always be the constant. So for example, so the limit as x approaches 4 of 6 is equal to, so by the limit of a constant, this is equal to 6. Next example, if we have the limit of negative 143 as x approaches 0. So since negative 143 is a constant, so by theorem 2, the answer of this is negative 143. Note that theorem 2 holds whatever man yung value ng a natin dito. So kahit na 2 ito or any number, is still the limit of negative 143 as x approaches 2 is equal to negative 143. Theorem 3 states that the limit of x as x approaches a is equal to a. So that is self-explanatory. So we have an example here. The limit of x as x approaches 5 is equal to, so by theorem 3, we have limit of x as x approaches 5 now is equal to 5 or a. Okay. So we have another example here. The limit of x as x approaches negative 1/2. So by theorem 3, the answer is negative 1/2. Theorem 4 states that if we are looking for the limit of a constant times a function as x approaches a, pwede natin actually ilabas yung constant na c and then i-multiply sa limit nung function natin as x approaches a. So for example, we have the limit of 2x as x approaches 1. So by theorem 4, pwede nating ilabas si 2. So we have 2 times the limit of x as x approaches 1. By theorem 3, what is the limit of this? So by theorem 3, the limit of this is equal to 1. So 2 times 1, so the answer is 2. Another example is the limit of 5x as x approaches negative 1. So by theorem 4, pwede nating ilabas si 5. 5 times the limit of x as x approaches negative 1. By theorem 3, this one is equal to negative 1. So that is 5 times negative 1. So the answer is negative 5. Theorem 5 states that the limit of a sum, okay, so we have two functions here na pinag-add. Sorry. Theorem 5 states that the limit of a sum or difference of two functions as x approaches a is actually equal to the sum or difference of the limits of the individual functions. Okay? So, pwede pala natin siyang, instead na kunin mo yung sum nito, pwede pala na kunin mo yung limit nito plus or minus yung limit nito. Okay? Note that Theorem 5 is also true for functions greater than 2. So, kunwari, tatlong function ito, or 4 or 5, nag-hold pa rin yung Theorem 5. So, for example, we have the limit of the quantity 2x plus 5 as x approaches 2. So, by Theorem 5, pwede nating i-separate to, magiging limit of 2x as x approaches 2 plus the limit of 5 as x approaches 2. And then, etong limit na to, by limit theorem number 4, di ba? Pwede nating ilabas yung constant. So we have 2 times the limit of x as x approaches 2 plus eto, limit of a constant. Okay? Ano lang to? This is equal to 5. So we have 2 now times eto by Theorem 3. The limit of x as x approaches 2 is 2 plus 5. So the answer now is 2 times 2 is 4 plus 5. The answer is 9. Example is the limit of the quantity 3 minus 7x as x approaches 5. So by Theorem 5, pwede nating i-separate. We have the limit of 3 as x approaches 5 minus the limit of 7x as x approaches 5. This is now equal to eto, limit of a constant. We have 3 minus eto by Theorem 4, pwede nating ilabas si 7 times the limit of x as x approaches 5. So we have 3 minus 7 times by Theorem 3, ito, this is equal to 5. So we have 3 minus 35, or the answer now is negative 32. Theorem 6 states that the limit of the product of two functions as x approaches a is actually equal to the product of the limits of the individual functions. Okay? So pag meron pala tayong product dito, hinahanap natin yung limit niya, okay? Pwede palang kunin natin yung limit nung isa and then i-multiply natin sa limit nung isa. Note that this is true for 2 or more. Okay, kahit mas maraming product pa yan, totoo pa rin itong theorem na ito. For the purpose of illustration, let's consider this limit of a function. So we have the limit of 2 times 4x as x approaches negative 2. So our first function is 2. And our second function is 4x. By limit theorem number 6, we can actually separate that. So we have the limit of 2 as x approaches negative 2 times the limit of 4x as x approaches negative 2. So, ito, limit lang to ng constant. So, we have 2 times, ito, by limit theorem number 4. Pwedeng ilabas si 4 times the limit of x as x approaches negative 2. Then, we have 2 times 4. Anong limit to? This is just equal to negative 2 by theorem number 3. Okay? So, we have 2 times 4 times negative 2, that is negative 16. Again, for the purpose of illustration, let's consider the limit of 3x times 5x as x approaches 1. So, by limit theorem number 6, we can actually separate. So, we have limit of 3x as x approaches 1 times the limit of 5x as x approaches 1. So, by limit theorem number 4, pwede nating ilabas si 3. So, limit of x as x approaches 1 times, again, limit theorem number 4, 5 times the limit of x as x approaches 1. So, we now have 3 times, by theorem number 3, this is 1, times 5, limit theorem number 3, this is equal to 1. So, we now have 3 times 5, so we have 15.